The red silk was a declaration. It whispered against Nia's skin, a second skin made of defiance and a grief so sharp it felt like rage. The dress was a column of pure crimson, clinging to the generous curve of her hips and the swell of her bust, a bold statement in a world that had always told her to take up less space. Today, she intended to be a landmark, a beautiful, unignorable catastrophe in the middle of her older sister's perfect day. Her fingers trembled as she fastened the delicate clasp of a diamond necklace. It felt cold against her throat. Alone. Everything about this moment felt borrowed. The courage, the jewels, the man who was waiting for her in the living room of his penthouse apartment, a space so silent and vast it felt more like a museum than a home. She looked at her reflection. 20 years old, and she felt ancient. The face looking back was hers. Full cheeks, wide brown eyes, lips that Kaido used to call too expressive, but the expression in those eyes was foreign. It was hard, polished, a shield forged over 2 years of quiet heartbreak. 2 years since Kaido had ended things, his words a clinical dissection of her flaws. Too sensitive. Too emotional. Not ambitious enough. Not enough. 6 months later, he was engaged to Rhonda, her sister, who was everything Nia was not. Slender, pragmatic, a lawyer on the fast track, someone who fits seamlessly into the pristine, wealthy world of Kaido's family. A sound, subtle as the slide of a blade from its sheath, came from the doorway. Nia's eyes lifted to meet his in the mirror. Ryu. He leaned against the frame, a study in lethal stillness. He did not enter her space, yet he owned it completely. His suit was a dark charcoal, tailored by hands that understood how to drape fabric over a body built for violence. It was perfect, severe, the kind of suit that made money look like old, inherited power. Ink, a deep, intricate blue-black, peeked from the starched white cuff at his wrist, a hint of the brutal artistry that covered his skin. He moved like the room owed him space.
"It is time," he said.
His voice was low, a gravelly baritone that held no hint of impatience, only absolute certainty. Nia's heart gave a painful thud. Not a flutter. Never a flutter with him. It was the heavy, primal beat of a cornered thing recognizing a predator. A predator who had, for reasons she could not fathom, decided to be on her side. "I know," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. She turned from the mirror, the silk of the dress swirling around her ankles. She forced herself to meet his gaze directly. His eyes were dark, almost black, and held a frightening intelligence. They saw everything. They saw the tremor in her hand, the bravado of her dress, the hairline cracks in her composure. He had found her working late at the university library, surrounded by books on Edo period art, a world away from his. He was a benefactor to the university, a name on a plaque, a ghost in the financial reports. Their meeting was a collision of worlds. He'd been walking the halls, a rare, solitary tour, and had stopped at her corral. He had asked a question about a woodblock print she was studying, his knowledge precise and unnerving. That conversation had led to another. He was drawn to her quiet focus, a stillness that mirrored his own, and she was drawn to the abyss of his power, the terrifying calm he projected. When the wedding invitation had arrived, a cream and gold monstrosity that felt like a slap, she had shattered. She told him about it during one of their strange, formal meetings, the words spilling out in a torrent of bitterness and pain. He had listened, his expression unreadable, his hands resting motionless on the polished table between them. When she was finished, hollowed out and ashamed of her outburst, he had said 5 words. "I will take you." It was not a question. It was a verdict. And Nia, drowning in her own humiliation, had clung to it like a life raft. Now, standing before him, she felt the true weight of that decision. He was not just a wealthy, intimidating man. He was the head of the Ishikawa-gumi, a name whispered with fear in the highest and lowest echelons of Tokyo. He was a man whose presence was a statement of power far beyond Kaido's new money arrogance. Bringing him to this wedding was not just an act of defiance. It was an act of war. His eyes drifted from her face, down the column of her throat to the necklace, then to the dress. He did not smile. His face rarely betrayed any emotion beyond a glacial calm. But something shifted in his gaze, an intensity that felt like a physical touch. "Red is your color," he stated, a simple observation that landed with the weight of a vow. He stepped forward, his movements economical and precise. He stopped just before her, the air crackling between them. The scent of his cologne, a clean, sharp mix of cypress and smoke, enveloped her. He reached out, not to touch her, but to adjust the necklace at her throat. His fingers, long and elegant, brushed against her skin. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt through her entire body. It was a touch that was both surgical and possessive. His thumb grazed the pulse point at the base of her throat, feeling the frantic beat she could not control. He held her gaze. "They will see you," he said, his voice a low murmur. "And they will regret what they lost." She told herself it was survival instinct that made her nod, that made her heart hammer not with fear, but with a strange, dangerous thrill. He was not offering comfort. He was offering a weapon, and she was going to use it. He stepped back, the space between them once again a chasm of unspoken things. "The car is waiting." That was the moment everything changed. As she walked past him and out of the room, his hand settled for a barest second on the small of her back. A gesture of guidance. A claim. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. She walked into the lion's den, and for the first time, she felt like she had teeth of her own. The drive to the hotel was a blur of neon and steel, Tokyo rushing past the tinted windows of the Maybach. The silence inside the car was absolute, a heavy, weighted blanket. Nia stared out at the city lights, her reflection a ghostly image against the glass. The woman in the window looked poised, dangerous even. A queen in her borrowed chariot, on her way to burn down a kingdom. Ryu sat beside her, a portrait of serene menace. He did not look at her. He stared straight ahead, as if he could see the future playing out on the back of the driver's headrest. His stillness was unnerving. It was the calm of a storm's eye, a place of temporary peace surrounded by unimaginable destructive force. She remembered Kaido's frantic energy, his constant need for motion, for noise, for validation. He filled every silence with talk of his accomplishments, his ambitions, his father's company. He had been a whirlwind of ego, and for a time, she had mistaken his energy for passion. Ryu was the opposite. He was a vacuum, pulling all the energy and noise in the room toward him, absorbing it, controlling it. The car slowed, gliding to a stop before the grand entrance of the Imperial Hotel. Bellhops in pristine uniforms froze, their professional smiles faltering as they recognized the car, or perhaps the man inside it. One of them, an older man with a ramrod-straight spine, hurried forward, his face a mask of profound respect. He opened Ryu's door first. Ryu unfolded himself from the car, his height and presence immediately commanding the space. He did not wait for the doorman to circle around. He opened Nia's door himself, extending a hand to her. His palm was calloused, a stark contrast to the manicured perfection of his appearance. It was the hand of a man who worked, though his work involved breaking bones and loyalties, not pushing paper. Nia placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, secure. He helped her out of the car, the crimson silk of her dress pooling for a moment on the clean pavement before she straightened. He did not let go of her hand. Instead, he tucked it into the crook of his arm, a classic, almost courtly gesture that felt shockingly intimate. It bound her to his side. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice for her ears alone. "Do not speak to anyone unless I am with you." They walked through the grand lobby, a cavern of marble and gold. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and money. People stopped talking as they passed. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. It was not just because of her, a statuesque black woman in a fiery red dress, a stark and beautiful contrast to the muted palette of the Japanese elite. It was because of him. The deference was immediate, instinctive. Men in expensive suits gave slight, almost imperceptible bows. Women averted their eyes. They were not just looking at a powerful man, they were looking at the Yakuza. They were looking at the Ishikawagumi. Nia felt a tremor of real fear, cold and sharp. This was not a game. This was not about making her ex jealous. This was about walking into a room with a man who held the power of life and death in his quiet, watchful hands. She tightened her grip on his arm, the hard muscle beneath the fine wool of his suit an anchor in the swirling vortex of stairs. They reached the entrance to the grand ballroom. The sound of a string quartet and polite laughter spilled out. An attendant in a tuxedo stood by a gilded guest list, but he took one look at Ryu and stepped aside as if he'd been burned, bowing low. Ryu paused at the threshold, his gaze sweeping the room. Nia followed his line of sight. It was a fantasy of white and gold. Thousands of white roses. A towering cake. Crystal chandeliers dripping light onto a sea of perfectly coiffed heads. And there, at the center of it all, was Kaido. He was laughing, his hand on the arm of his new bride, her sister. Rhonda looked radiant in a dress that probably cost more than Nia's university tuition. She was smiling, a bright, brittle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes.
She saw them first.
Her smile froze, faltering for a fraction of a second. Her eyes, so like Nia's own, widened in shock, then narrowed in disbelief and fury. Then Kaido turned. His laughter died in his throat. He stared at Nia, his eyes tracing the lines of her red dress, her body, a body he had once claimed to love and then discarded with clinical cruelty. His face, usually a mask of smug confidence, went pale. But it was when his eyes landed on the man at her side that the color drained completely, replaced by a stark, primal fear. Ryu felt the shift. He felt Kaido's fear like a change in barometric pressure. He looked down at Nia, his expression unreadable. "Breathe," he commanded softly. Then he led her into the room. Every step felt deliberate, each footfall on the plush carpet a drumbeat marking their advance. The polite chatter in the room did not just quiet, it evaporated. A wave of silence radiated out from them, a ripple effect of pure, unadulterated power. They were an island of stillness in a sea of frozen faces. This was his world, a world where silence was a weapon and fear was a currency, and she had just willingly stepped into the heart of it. They were given a table near the front, a table that had clearly been empty, reserved for someone who had not been expected to arrive. The staff scrambled to set 2 places, their movements jerky and nervous. No one approached them. They sat in a bubble of isolation, a king and his consort holding court in a hostile territory. "Are you all right?" Ryu asked, his voice still low, but the question was sharp, demanding an honest answer. Nia looked across the room at her sister. Rhonda was whispering furiously to Kaido, her face a mask of anger. Kaido was not looking at his bride. He was staring at their table, at Ryu, his posture rigid with a terror that was almost pathetic. He looked like a boy who had just seen a ghost. "I'm fine," Nia said, and was surprised to find it was the truth. The humiliation she had dreaded, the pitying looks, the whispers, none of it touched her. It was all directed at Kaido and Rhonda. She was not the tragic figure here. She was the mystery, the threat. They looked startled. A ghost of a smile, so faint it was barely there, touched Ryu's lips. Startled is a mild word for it. He picked up a glass of water, his movements unhurried. Kaido's father built his shipping empire on contracts his rivals could not secure. He made alliances with the wrong people, owed debts he could not pay. Nia's blood ran cold. "What kind of debts?" "The kind that are passed from father to son," Ryu said, his eyes fixed on Kaido. "The kind that are paid with more than money." He took a slow sip of water. "The clan his father allied with was an old rival of my family. They operated without honor. They broke an oath. A transgression my father never forgave." That's when she understood. Ryu wasn't just here as a favor to her. His presence was a message. It was a reminder of old sins, of debts still outstanding. This was personal. His wound, the shame he carried, was tied to the very people celebrating tonight. He was here to reclaim a piece of his family's honor, using Kaido's terror as a stage. The danger in the room escalated from social to tangible. This was not just a family drama anymore. It was a Yakuza power play unfolding at a wedding. A man approached their table. He was older, with a face like a clenched fist and eyes that held a lifetime of violence. He bowed deeply to Ryu, ignoring Mia completely. "Head of the family," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Your presence here is unexpected." "I am where I need to be, Tanaka," Ryu replied, his tone dismissive. He did not introduce the man. He did not need to. This was one of his soldiers, his lieutenant. Tanaka's eyes flickered to Kaido's family table, where an older man, presumably Kaido's father, was watching them with a grim expression. The Sasaki clan is also in attendance. They see this as a provocation. "Let them," Ryu said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a thread of cold steel. "Let them remember what happens to those who lack discipline." The lieutenant bowed again and retreated, melting back into the crowd. The threat was no longer abstract. It was here, in this room, breathing the same recycled, air-conditioned air. The Sasaki, the rival clan. They were here. Mia felt a sudden, dizzying urge to run. To get up, walk out of this gilded cage, and disappear back into the safety of her anonymous life. She could. The exit was right there. No one was physically stopping her. She looked at Ryu. He was watching her, his dark eyes searching her face, gauging her reaction. He was giving her the choice. He would not force her to stay. His brand of control was more subtle than that. She thought of Kaido's dismissive words, of her sister's casual betrayal. She thought of the years she had spent trying to make herself smaller, quieter, less of a burden. She looked at the crimson dress, a beacon of defiance. Leaving now would undo it all. It would make her the frightened girl Kaido always said she was. She took a slow, deliberate breath. She met Ryu's gaze and held it. She reached across the small table and laid her hand over his, which rested on the white linen. His skin was cool. His hand was completely still beneath hers. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice quiet but firm. It was the first charged moment between them that was not born of his power over her, but of her choice to align with him. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, passed through his eyes. He turned his hand over and curled his fingers around hers, his grip surprisingly gentle. The silence that stretched between them was not empty. It was filled with her decision. She had chosen to stay. She had chosen him. The wedding speeches began, a procession of hollow sentiment and corporate platitudes. Kaido's father spoke of mergers and dynasties, barely mentioning Rhonda by name. It was a business transaction, and his son's bride was the latest acquisition. Then Kaido stood up. He raised his glass, his hand shaking slightly. He looked at Rhonda, but his eyes kept darting toward their table. "To my beautiful bride," he began, his voice strained. "A woman of grace and pragmatism." He stumbled over his words, his confident facade cracking under the weight of Ryu's silent scrutiny. He was trying to reclaim control, to re-establish his dominance in a room that no longer saw him as the most powerful man present. He then made his mistake. His gaze landed squarely on Nia. "And to family," he said, a malicious glint in his eye. "Those who are here to support us, and those who find other ways to seek attention." The insult was public, a petty, pathetic jab. The room tensed. Nia felt a hot flush of anger, the old humiliation trying to claw its way back up. But before she could react, Ryu squeezed her hand, a silent command to wait. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. The sensation sent a shiver down her spine. "The Sasaki heir is sitting 3 tables to your left," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "The one with the silver watch. Kaido has been in business with him for 6 months. A secret partnership his father does not know about. A partnership that funnels money away from his family's company and into Sasaki hands." The information was a weapon, handed to her, loaded and ready. This was her chance to do more than just endure. This was her chance to fight back. This was her morally gray moment. When the speeches were over, and the guests began to mingle, Kaido approached their table. He came alone, a foolish, arrogant move. Rhonda watched from a distance, her face a storm cloud. "Nia," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I see you brought a guest." He glanced at Ryu, a flicker of fear in his eyes, but his pride forced him to press on. "This is a family event. He's my date," Nia said, her voice even. She did not rise. She made him look down on her, a subtle shift in the power dynamic. "I think it's time for you and your date to leave," Kaido said, trying to sound authoritative. "You're making my wife uncomfortable." Nia smiled, a slow, cold smile she had learned from the man sitting beside her. "Really? Because you look more uncomfortable than she does, Kaido. But then, I suppose it must be stressful, keeping secrets." Kaido's face tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you?" Nia let the question hang in the air. She glanced pointedly at the man with the silver watch. "I always thought you were a terrible businessman. It's nice to see the Sasaki clan agrees. I wonder what your father would think of your new partnership." The color drained from Kaido's face. He looked as if she had physically struck him. The raw, undisguised terror in his eyes was a victory. She had used Ryu's darkness, his information, and made it her own. She had crossed a line, and it felt like power. He stared at her, speechless. Then his eyes flickered to Ryu, understanding dawning. He saw where the information had come from. He saw the trap he had walked into. Ryu, who had been watching the exchange with an unnerving stillness, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the ambient noise of the party like a razor. "You are embarrassing your bride." He looked past Kaido to where Rhonda stood, frozen. "And you are disrespecting mine." The word hung in the air.
Meaning?
It was not a confession of love. It was a statement of fact. A claim. It was more dangerous, more honest, than any romantic declaration. Nia's breath hitched. She was his. In this room, in this world, that word was a shield and a cage. Kaido flinched as if burned. He backed away, his arrogance shattered, and scurried back to his sister's side, his face ashen. Nia looked at Ryu. Her heart was pounding, a frantic, wild rhythm. "You didn't have to say that." "Yes," he said, his dark eyes holding hers. "I did." He saw the beautiful, terrible thing she had just done, the way she had wielded his power with such precision. A slow, appreciative look entered his eyes. "You look beautiful when you're ruining them." That was the confession. Not of love, but of recognition. He saw the darkness in her, the part that had been willing to be ruthless, and he was not afraid of it. He admired it. The night wore on, a tense tableau of unspoken threats and social warfare. Then, the enemy escalated. Kaido, humiliated and desperate, made his final move. He spoke to two large men in ill-fitting suits, hotel security, and pointed toward their table. He was trying to have them thrown out. It was a pathetic gesture, a child's tantrum, but it was a direct challenge. He was targeting her, trying to assert his dominance in the only way he had left. The security guards approached, their expressions apologetic but firm. "Sir, ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to leave." Ryu did not even look at them. He kept his eyes on Nia. "Did you enjoy the wedding?" he asked, as if they were having a casual conversation. "It was memorable," she replied, her voice shaking slightly. The guard cleared his throat. "Sir." Ryu slowly turned his head. He did not raise his voice. He did not move a muscle. He simply looked at the man. He held his gaze, and in that silent, bottomless stare, the guard saw something that made him take an involuntary step back. The man's professional composure crumbled, replaced by the same raw fear Nia had seen in Kaido. "We are guests of the Ishikawa family," Ryu said, his voice soft as falling snow, and just as cold. It was a lie, but it was a lie no one in this room would dare to question. He then turned his gaze to Kaido, who was watching from across the room. The message was clear. "You have no power here." The security guards bowed, a gesture of submission, and retreated faster than they had approached. The battle was over. Kaido had lost. The entire room had witnessed his utter and complete humiliation at the hands of a man who had not even bothered to raise his voice. Nia felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. In the climax of his confrontation, she had done nothing. He had protected her. He had claimed her. But she knew this was not the end. That's when Rhonda started walking toward them. Her face was a pale, tight mask of fury. The final confrontation was not with Kaido. It was with her sister. Rhonda stopped at their table, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She ignored Ryu, focusing all her rage on Nia. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "How could you do this? How could you try to ruin my wedding day?" Here it was. The moment of truth. Nia could have let Ryu handle it. She could have stayed silent, sheltered behind the wall of his power. But that would have made her a damsel, a passive object in his possession. She had to act. She had to be the one to end this. Nia stood up, the red dress a stark contrast to Rhonda's bridal white. They were equals in height, sisters, but tonight they were on opposite sides of a war. "You're asking me that?" Nia's voice was quiet, but it held a core of steel. "You, who started dating my ex-boyfriend 2 months after he broke my heart. You, who never once called to ask how I was. Who sent me an invitation as if I were some distant cousin you were obligated to invite. He loves me," Rhonda insisted, her voice cracking. "He chose me. Did he?" Nia asked, her gaze cutting. "Or did he choose a version of what he thought he wanted? Someone who fit. Someone easy." She took a step closer, lowering her voice, so only Rhonda could hear. "Look at him, Rhonda. Look at him right now. He's not looking at his beautiful bride. He's looking at this man," she gestured to Ryu, "and he's terrified. Is that the man you want? A coward who crumbles the second a real man walks into the room?" Every word was a precisely aimed dart. She was not shouting. She was dissecting. She was using the truth as her scalpel. "You chose this," Nia said, her voice softening with a final, terrible pity. "You chose this hollow, perfect life. I hope it makes you happy." Rhonda stared at her, tears welling in her eyes. All the anger, all the righteous fury, drained out of her, leaving behind a brittle, broken woman in a ridiculously expensive dress. She had no response. Nia had taken away all her weapons. Nia turned away from her sister. She looked at Ryu. "I'm ready to go." He stood, his dark eyes holding an expression she could not decipher. It was not pride. It was something deeper. Acknowledgement. He saw her, all of her. The strength, the vulnerability, the quiet capacity for ruthlessness. He placed his hand on the small of her back. It was not a gesture of guidance this time. It was a declaration. She was his. They walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of the party behind them. The silence that had followed them in now followed them out. They did not look back. The cost was clear. Her relationship with her sister was severed beyond repair. The last bridge to her old life had been burned, and she had been the one to light the match. She had made a choice, and a price had been paid. Nothing in this world was free. In the silent cocoon of the Maybach, as it slid through the glittering Tokyo night, Nia stared at her reflection once more. The woman in the window was the same, yet entirely different. The hardness in her eyes was no longer a shield. It was a part of her. Ryu did not speak. He simply reached over and took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. His touch was no longer a jolt or a surprise. It felt like a certainty, an anchor. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know if this was love or survival or something else entirely for which there was no name. She only knew that she had walked into a fire, and instead of being consumed, she had found a strange and dangerous home in the flames. She looked at their joined hands, her dark skin against his, the hint of ink at his wrist a dark promise. She had made her choice, and for the first time in a long, long time, she did not regret it.